Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the quieter corridors of history. Tonight, we venture into the shadowed halls of medieval courts, where the simple act of laughter could determine your fate. Settle into your comfortable space. Allow your breathing to slow, and imagine yourself stepping across centuries into a world where every expression was watched, weighed, and judged with the precision of a master craftsman examining precious stones. Please consider subscribing to the channel and drop a like in this video. In our modern world, laughter flows freely, a spontaneous burst of joy, amusement, or nervous energy that we rarely think to contain. We laugh at comedies, at awkward moments, at our own mistakes without considering the consequences. But in the medieval court, where power hung as delicately as morning mist over a still pond, where a misplaced smile could be read as mockery and a poorly timed chuckle might suggest heresy or rebellion, your very facial muscles were instruments that required the most careful orchestration. Every twitch, every raised eyebrow, every slight upturn of the lips was interpreted, analyzed, and filed away in the mental archives of those who watched, and there were always watchers. Top picture, if you will, the stone corridors of a 13th century castle where servants moved with calculated precision, their footsteps muffled by rushes scattered across cold floors. Imagine the weight of awareness that settled on their shoulders each morning as they entered those halls where nobles practiced their expressions before polished metal mirrors, and where the court jester, perhaps the only soul permitted genuine mirth, walked a razor's edge between entertainment and execution. Here, in these hushed chambers, perfumed with incense and thick with unspoken rules, where tapestries absorb both sound and secrets, we'll explore why something as natural as laughter became a dangerous transgression, requiring the same careful consideration as a diplomatic negotiation. The medieval court was a theater where every performance was life or death, right? Where the audience held the power to elevate or destroy with a single glance. In this world, your face was not your onit, belonged to the intricate web of social hierarchy, religious doctrine, and political maneuvering that governed every aspect of existence. A smile at the wrong moment could brand you as a heretic. A laugh during a solemn pronouncement might mark you as a traitor. Even the absence of the proper expression could be interpreted as defiance, sullenness, or worse, a sign that you harbored dangerous thoughts behind your carefully constructed mask. Tonight's journey will carry us through 4 distinct realms of this fascinating world. We'll begin by walking in the footsteps of a common servant, feeling the weight of constant observation as every muscle in your face becomes a potential betrayer. Every moment, a test of your understanding of the invisible rules that governed survival. Then we'll witness the dramatic fall of a court entertainer whose mistimed laughter sealed his fate. A cautionary tale that echoed through the halls long after his punishment. We'll uncover the mysterious codes of behavior that governed every gesture, every glance, every breath in these halls of power, examining the intricate manuscripts and behavioral guides that attempted to catalog the proper expression for every conceivable situation. Finally, we'll step into the rarefied world of the nobility themselves, where even they trained their own expressions with the dedication of musicians perfecting their craft, hiring tutors to teach them the art of appropriate laughter. So, breathe deeply, let your shoulders relax, and prepare to discover why. In a world where survival often depended on reading the subtle language of power, your laughter was never truly your own. It was a gift you gave to your superiors, a weapon they could use against you, in a mirror that reflected not your joy, but your place in the great, unforgiving hierarchy of medieval society. The sun has barely crested the horizon when you wake in your small chamber, the straw beneath your thin mattress crackling with your first movements. You are a servant in the household of Lord Edmund de Montfort, and today, like every day, your survival depends not just on the tasks you perform, but on the careful management of your own face. As you splash cold water from a wooden basin onto your cheeks, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the dark surface and immediately school your features into the neutral expression that's become as natural to you as breathing. Your morning begins in the servants' quarters, where the air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and the residue of yesterday's cooking fires. Here, among your fellow servants, you might allow yourself a small smile as you share a crust of bread with Mary, the kitchen maid, or nod approvingly at Thomas as he demonstrates his skill at quickly polishing silver. Key, but even these small expressions are carefully calculated. Mary has been known to curry favor with the head cook by reporting the behavior of other servants, and Thomas, for all his apparent friendliness, has eyes that linger too long on faces, noting who smiles too readily, who seems too comfortable, in circumstances that should inspire only humble gratitude. The first test of your day comes, as you enter the great hall to begin your duties. The massive stone chamber stretches before you, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that seem to press down with the weight of centuries. Tapestries depicting scenes of noble conquest line the walls, their threads catching the flickering light from torches mounted in iron sconces. The air carries the lingering scent of last night's feast-roasted meat, spilled wine, and the sweet perfume favored by the ladies of the court. As you cross the threshold, your body instinctively adjusts, your shoulders pull back slightly, your head tilts at just the right angle to convey respect without servility, and your mouth settles into a line that suggests attentiveness without curiosity. You have learned, through painful experience, that the great hall is a place where expressions are read like Holy Scripture. The Lord's chaplain, Brother Augustine, has a particular talent for interpreting the spiritual state of the household staff through their facial expressions. Last month, he called young Peter before the Lord, claiming that the boy's tendency to smile while scrubbing the floor suggested an irreverent attitude toward the sacred nature of honest work. Peter was sentenced to 3 days of fasting and additional prayers, but you know that others have faced far worse for similar infractions. The chaplain's ability to find heretical intent in a poorly timed grin has become legendary among the servants. And you've learned to keep your face as blank as an unmarked parchment when he's near. Your first duty is to tend the fire in the Lord's private chamber, a task that requires you to move with absolute silence through corridors where the wrong footstep might wake someone whose dreams should not be disturbed. As you push open the heavy oak door, the hinges protest with a soft groan that seems to echo through the stone walls. Inside, Lord Edmund lies sleeping, his face peaceful in the pale morning light filtering through narrow windows. His wife, Lady Margaret, sits at a small table, already dressed and examining what appears to be a letter. She looks up as you enter, and in that moment, you must calibrate your expression with the precision of a master craftsman. Too much attention to her beauty might suggest improper thoughts. Too little might imply disrespect. A smile would be presumptuous. Why should a servant be happy to see a noble? But a completely neutral expression might suggest indifference to her presence, which would be equally problematic. You settle on a look that conveys respectful acknowledgement, allowing your eyes to meet hers briefly before looking down at your hands. She nods once, a gesture that grants you permission to proceed with your task, and you feel a small surge of relief that you have successfully navigated this first encounter of the day. As you kneel before the cold hearth, arranging kindling with practiced efficiency, you're acutely aware of Lady Margaret's presence behind you. She has returned to her letter, but you know that she's still observing, still evaluating. The nobility have little else to occupy their time, and the behavior of servants provides a constant source of entertainment and concern. You've heard the kitchen gossip about Lord Edmund's brother, who dismissed 3 servants last winter simply because he didn't like the way they looked at him during meals. Insolent expressions, he called them, though the servants swore they had done nothing more than serve his food and clear his plates. The fire catches, and as the flames begin to dance, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. But even this small pleasure must be carefully managed. Too much pride in your work might suggest that you're seeking praise above your station. Too little might imply that you don't care about serving your betters properly. You settle for a brief nod of acknowledgement at your own competence, then gather your tools and prepare to withdraw. As you stand, Lady Margaret speaks. "The fire burns well today," she observes, her voice carrying the measured tone that nobility use when addressing servants, neither warm nor cold, but carefully neutral. This is a test, you realize immediately. How do you respond to praise from a lady of the court? A smile might suggest that you're pleased with yourself, which would be inappropriate. No response might seem ungrateful. You choose your words carefully, keeping your voice low and respectful. "I am grateful it serves you well, my lady," you reply, allowing just the slightest upturn at the corners of your mouth, not quite a smile, but an expression that suggests appropriate pleasure at having fulfilled your duty. Lady Margaret nods approvingly, and you withdraw from the chamber, your heart beating slightly faster at having successfully navigated another potential trap. The morning progresses with a series of similar challenges. In the kitchen, you must show enough interest in the cook's instructions to demonstrate attentiveness, but not so much enthusiasm that you appear to be enjoying yourself inappropriately. When the head butler assigns you to polish the silver candlesticks for tonight's dinner, you must exhibit the proper degree of conscientiousness, snuff, to show that you understand the importance of the task, but not so much that you seem to be taking pride in work that should be performed solely for the glory of God and the comfort of your betters. Each interaction requires its own careful calibration. With your fellow servants, you can afford slightly more relaxed expressions, but even here, you must be cautious. The hierarchy among the staff is as rigid as that among the nobility, and the wrong expression to the wrong person can result in extra duties, reduced rations, or worse. You've learned to read the subtle signs, the way the head butler's eyebrows draw together when he's displeased, the manner in which the cook's mouth tightens when she's about to assign an unpleasant task, the particular stillness that falls over the kitchen when someone has made a mistake that will require punishment as the morning wears on. You begin to feel the familiar tension that comes from constant vigilance. Your facial muscles ache from the effort of maintaining proper expressions, and you find yourself longing for the brief respite of your midday meal, when you can retreat to the servants' quarters and allow your face to relax, if only for a few precious minutes. But even then, you must be careful. There are always eyes watching, always ears listening for the telltale signs of servants who might be growing too comfortable, too familiar with one another, too inclined to forget their place in the great hierarchy that governs every aspect of life in the castle. The weight of this constant performance is something that modern minds can barely comprehend. Every expression, every gesture, every fleeting emotion that crosses your face is subject to interpretation, analysis, and judgment. You have learned to live with a mask so perfectly fitted that sometimes you forget what your real face looks like. What expressions might come naturally if you were free to simply be human, rather than a carefully constructed representation of appropriate servility. But this is your world, and these are the rules by which you must live if you hope to survive another day in the shadowed halls of power, where laughter is a luxury you cannot afford, and where the wrong smile might be the last expression you ever wear. The afternoon brings with it the most treacherous part of your day, the formal court session where Lord Edmund receives petitioners, settles disputes, and conducts the business of his domain. As a servant, your role is to remain invisible while being completely present, to anticipate needs while never appearing to presume, and most critically, to witness the theater of power while keeping your own reactions carefully locked away behind a mask of perfect neutrality. You enter the great hall through the servants' entrance, carrying a heavy silver tray laden with wine cups that have been polished until they gleam like mirrors. The hall has been transformed since morning. The long tables have been arranged in a precise formation, with Lord Edmund's chair elevated on a dais at the far end. Tapestries have been adjusted to catch the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, creating an atmosphere of majesty that seems to press down on everyone present. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles, frankincense from the small altar in the corner, and the subtle perfumes worn by the assembled nobility. As you move through the hall, placing cups at designated positions, you become acutely aware of the complex web of gazes that fill the space. Lady Margaret sits to her husband's right, her face a perfect mask of serene attention. To his left, Brother Augustine holds a leather-bound ledger, his eyes scanning the assembled crowd with the intensity of a hawk searching for prey. Lesser nobles occupy the chairs arranged in careful order of precedence, each one positioned according to their exact rank in the intricate hierarchy that governs every aspect of court life. Your first challenge comes as you approach the high table. Sir Geoffrey, Lord Edmund's cousin, and a man known for his quick temper and quicker sword, gestures impatiently for wine. As you lean forward to fill his cup, he makes a crude jest about the serving girls in the kitchen, his voice carrying just loud enough for those nearby to hear. The comment is designed to provoke a reaction, perhaps a blush, a nervous giggle, or a look of offense that he can then use to demonstrate his power over the servants. You have learned to navigate such moments with the skill of a diplomat. Your face remains absolutely neutral as you pour the wine, neither acknowledging the jest nor pointedly ignoring it. This requires a delicate balance. Too much attention to his words might suggest inappropriate interest, while too little might imply that you consider yourself above his notice. You choose a middle path, allowing your eyes to flicker briefly to his face in acknowledgement that he has spoken. Then, returning your attention to the task at hand with the focused concentration of someone who understands that their primary duty is service, not entertainment. Sir Geoffrey, perhaps disappointed by your lack of reaction, tries again. This time, his jest is more pointed, more personal, designed to crack the careful composure that you've spent years perfecting. But you've been trained by necessity to withstand such tests. Your expression remains as unchanging as carved stone, and after a moment, he loses interest and turns his attention to the approaching petitioners. The formal session begins with a case that immediately tests your ability to maintain proper expressions. A merchant from the village below has been accused of cheating the church in its tithes, and Brother Augustine presents evidence with the methodical precision of a man who has built his career on finding sin in the most innocent actions. Merchant, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and hands that shake slightly as he speaks, attempts to defend himself with growing desperation as the case unfolds. You find yourself positioned near the wall where you can observe the entire proceedings while remaining ready to serve if called upon. The merchant's story is compelling. He claims that his ledgers were damaged in a recent fire, making it impossible to provide exact records of his transactions. His wife, he explains, has been ill for months, and the cost of her care has left him struggling to meet all his obligations. He begs for mercy, for understanding, for the chance to make restitution over time rather than face the harsh penalties that Brother Augustine is demanding. The story tugs at something deep in your chest, a sympathetic response that you must carefully suppress. Any sign of compassion for the merchant's plight could be interpreted as criticism of the church's position, or worse, as evidence of your own questionable spiritual condition. You've seen servants punished for showing inappropriate motion during such proceedings, a tear during a particularly moving plea, a frown during a harsh sentence. Even a slight nod of understanding at the wrong moment can be grounds for discipline. But suppressing your natural reactions is only part of the challenge. You must also read the room correctly. understanding the subtle currents of opinion that flow beneath the surface of the formal proceedings. Lord Edmund's face reveals nothing, but you've learned to read the minute signs that indicate his thoughts, the way his fingers tap against the arm of his chair when he's growing impatient, the slight tilt of his head when he's actually listening, the particular stillness that settles over him when he's already decided on a course of action. Lady Margaret's reactions are equally important to decode. She has significant influence over her husband's decisions, particularly in matters that touch on charity or mercy. You notice that her hands remain folded in her lap throughout the merchant's plea, never moving to fidget with her jewelry or adjust her veil signs that usually indicate emotional engagement. This stillness could mean she's unmoved by the man's plight, key, or it could suggest that she's working to maintain her own composure in the face of a situation that affects her more deeply than she's willing to show. The other nobles present each, offer their own subtle commentary through carefully controlled expressions. Sir Geoffrey's slight smile suggests he's enjoying the merchant's discomfort, while Lady Eleanor, Lord Edmund's sister, keeps her eyes fixed on her hands in a way that might indicate either boredom or deliberate avoidance of the proceedings. These reactions create a complex, emotional landscape that you must navigate without appearing to pay attention to anything other than your duties. When Brother Augustine calls for the merchant to be subjected to trial by ordeal process that would likely result in permanent injury or death, feel your jaw tighten involuntarily. Flee. The reaction is minute, lasting perhaps half a second. But in that moment, you realize with cold terror that Lady Margaret's eyes have shifted to your face. She noticed for a heartbeat that seems to stretch into eternity. Her gaze holds yours, and you see in her expression a flicker of something that might be understanding, or might be calculation. You recover quickly, allowing your face to settle back into perfect neutrality, but the damage may already be done. In the medieval court, such moments of revealed emotion are rarely forgotten, and they can be weaponized months or even years later when circumstances make it convenient. You've just provided Lady Margaret with a piece of information about your character that she could use to your advantage or detriment, depending on her needs and inclinations. The session continues with a series of other cases of boundary dispute between two farmers, a question about the inheritance rights of a bastard son, a complaint about the behavior of traveling merchants in the village market. Each case requires its own careful management of your expressions and reactions. When the bastard son pleads for recognition, you must show neither sympathy for his plight nor satisfaction at his likely rejection. When the farmers begin arguing loudly about a strip of land that both claim, you must remain impassive, even as their voices rise and their gestures become increasingly heated. The final case of the afternoon proves to be the most challenging. A young woman from the village has been accused of witchcraft by her neighbors, claim that her laughter has an unnatural quality that suggests demonic influence. The accusation is absurd. The woman is clearly simple-minded, and her laughter is nothing more than the uninhibited joy of someone who lacks the mental capacity to understand the social constraints that govern normal behavior. But in the medieval world, difference is often interpreted as danger, and the crowd that has gathered to witness the proceedings seems genuinely frightened by this harmless soul. As the woman is brought forward, still laughing softly to herself as she examines the colorful banners hanging from the rafters, you feel a complex mix of emotions that you must carefully suppress. There's pity for her obvious vulnerability, anger at the cruelty of her accusers, and a deep, cold fear that recognizes how easily suspicion can fall on anyone who fails to conform to the narrow expectations of acceptable behavior. Her laughter, so innocent and natural, has become evidence of supernatural corruption in the minds of people who have been taught to fear anything doesn't fit their understanding of proper Christian conduct. The proceedings against the woman are swift and brutal. Brother Augustine, perhaps energized by his earlier success, with the merchant presents a case that transforms every aspect of her behavior into evidence of diabolic influence. Her laughter becomes the voice of demons. Her simple pleasure in small things becomes evidence of unnatural satisfaction with worldly concerns. Her inability to understand complex theological questions becomes proof that she's been corrupted by forces beyond human comprehension. Throughout this travesty, you must maintain absolute control over your expressions and reactions. Any sign of disagreement with the proceedings could be interpreted as sympathy for witchcraft, or worse, as evidence of your own corruption. You've heard whispers of servants who were investigated for showing inappropriate reactions during such trials. And you know that the line between witness and accused can be crossed with terrifying ease as the woman is led away to await her fate, still laughing softly and apparently unaware of the danger she faces. You feel the weight of the afternoon's experiences settling on your shoulders like a heavy cloak. The constant vigilance required to navigate these treacherous waters has left. You're emotionally and physically exhausted, but your day is far from over. The evening feast awaits, bringing with it a whole new set of challenges and dangers for someone whose very survival depends on the careful management of their own face. The afternoon court session ends with Lord Edmund's pronouncement of sentences. The merchant will face trial by ordeal. Okay, the boundary dispute will be settled through combat between champions. Okay, and the accused, which will be examined by church authorities. As the assembled nobles rise and begin to disperse, you move efficiently through the hall, collecting the wine cups and preparing for the evening's festivities. But even these mundane tasks require continued vigilance, continued performance, continued suppression of your natural human responses to the injustices and cruelties you've witnessed. This is the burden of the servant in the medieval court, to see everything, understand everything, and react to nothing. Your face has become a tool of survival, carefully crafted and constantly maintained, never allowed to reveal the thoughts and feelings that might mark you as dangerous, different, or simply human. In a world where laughter can be evidence of heresy and sympathy can be proof of corruption, your greatest skill is not in the tasks you perform, but in the emotions you never allow yourself to show. As twilight descends over the castle, the great hall undergoes its most dramatic transformation of the day. The afternoon's formal proceedings give way to the evening feast, an elaborate performance of wealth, power, and social hierarchy that requires every participant to don increasingly complex masks of appropriate behavior. For you, a servant navigating this treacherous landscape, the evening presents both the greatest dangers and the most subtle opportunities for those skilled enough to read the undercurrents that flow beneath the surface of medieval court life. The preparation for the feast begins hours before the first noble enters the hall. You work alongside dozens of other servants, each playing their part in creating an atmosphere of otherworldly magnificence designed to reinforce natural order that places your betters so far above you that they seem to inhabit a different realm entirely. The long tables are covered with pristine white linen, each fold pressed to perfection and arranged with mathematical precision. Silver plates, polished to mirror brightness, reflect the dancing flames of hundreds of candles arranged in elaborate candelabra that cast shifting shadows across the stone walls as you carry platters of food from the kitchen. The scents that fill the air tell their own story of hierarchy and privilege. The sweet perfume of roasted peacock, prepared with exotic spices that cost more than most peasants earn in a lifetime, mingles with the rich aroma of wine imported from distant vineyards. Delicate pastries, shaped like castles and mythical beasts, displayed the kitchen's artistry, while subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures, depicting scenes from classical mythology, demonstrate the Lord's wealth and sophistication to his guests. Your role in this grand performance requires a level of invisibility that goes beyond mere physical presence. You must move through the hall like a ghost, anticipating needs before they're expressed. responding to subtle gestures and meaningful glances, all while maintaining the perfect balance of attentiveness and self-effacement that marks a well-trained servant. Too much eagerness to serve might be interpreted as presumption, while too little might suggest laziness or, worse, subtle defiance of the social order. The guests arrive in carefully orchestrated waves, each entrance choreographed to demonstrate their exact position in the complex hierarchy that governs every aspect of court life. Lesser nobles arrive first, their clothing rich but restrained, their greetings formal but not overly familiar. They position themselves at tables arranged according to strict protocols that have been refined over generations. Each seat representing not just a place to dine, but a public declaration of status, influence, and favor. As you pour wine for these early arrivals, you must read their faces and moods with the skill of a court diplomat. Sir Robert, the Lord's treasurer, has the slightly pinched expression that suggests he's concerned about the cost of the evening's entertainment. His wife, Lady Catherine, keeps touching her new necklacey, nervous gesture that might indicate anxiety about wearing jewelry that's perhaps too ostentatious for her actual rank. These subtle signs help you calibrate your own behavior, adjusting your level of deference and attention to match what each guest requires to feel properly acknowledged. The arrival of higher-ranking nobles creates ripples of tension and excitement throughout the hall. Duke William, Lord Edmund's overlord, enters with a retinue that includes knights whose reputations for violence are matched only by their skill at the complex games of courtly politics. His presence transforms the entire atmosphere of the feast, as every other guest must now recalibrate their behavior to acknowledge his superior status while maintaining their own dignity. Watching Duke William's entrance, you're struck by the elaborate performance that surrounds even the simplest actions. His greeting to Lord Edmund involves a complex sequence of gestures, bows, and verbal formulas that communicate not just respect, but the precise nature of their relationship. Lady Margaret's curtsy is timed to demonstrate both proper submission and confident grace, while the other nobles arrange themselves in patterns that reflect their understanding of the shifting alliances and obligations that bind them all together. Your own behavior during these moments requires extraordinary precision. You must show the proper degree of additional deference to Duke William without appearing to slight Lord Edmund, whose household you serve. When the Duke gestures for wine, you must respond with alacrity while maintaining the composed dignity that reflects well on your master. The wine must be poured with perfect technique. Your approach must be neither too bold nor too hesitant, and your withdrawal must be accomplished without turning your back on him, a breach of protocol that could result in immediate punishment. The feast itself unfolds like a carefully scripted drama, with each course serving as a new act in the ongoing performance of power and privilege. The first course arrives with great ceremony: whole roasted birds reconstructed in their feathers, fish prepared to appear as if they're swimming through seas of green sauce, and elaborate pies that release clouds of aromatic steam when cut. Each dish is presented not just as food, but as a demonstration of the Lord's ability to command resources, artistry, and service. As you serve these elaborate creations, you become acutely aware of the conversations flowing around you. William discusses the political situation in neighboring territories, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affect thousands of lives. Lady Margaret contributes observations about the marriages being arranged among the nobility, her comments revealing an intimate knowledge of bloodlines, alliances, and the subtle calculations that determine which unions will strengthen existing power structures. The other guests contribute their own perspectives, creating a complex web of information, gossip, and strategic positioning. Sir Geoffrey regales the table with tales of his recent campaign, carefully editing his stories to emphasize his own courage while diplomatically minimizing any failures or setbacks. Lady Eleanor discusses the latest fashions from the royal court. Her detailed descriptions serving as both entertainment and intelligence about the trends that might influence future political alliances. Throughout these conversations, you must maintain your position as invisible witness, never allowing any reaction to cross your face that might suggest you're actually listening to information that could be dangerous for a servant to possess. The nobility speak freely in front of servants, but this freedom comes with the implicit understanding that servants are essentially furniture present, but not truly conscious, useful, but not capable of independent thought or action. This assumption creates its own dangers. When Duke William mentions tensions with the neighboring lord that might lead to military action, you must show no sign of understanding the implications. When Lady Margaret discusses the questionable loyalty of certain court officials, you must remain as impassive as stone. These conversations provide you with information that could be valuable, but possessing such knowledge without the means to act on it safely creates a burden that weighs heavily on your consciousness. The entertainment portion of the evening brings its own unique challenges. Musicians perform complex songs that tell stories of noble deeds and courtly love, their lyrics carefully chosen to flatter the assembled guests, while subtly reinforcing the social values that justified their privileged position. Acrobats demonstrate feats of physical prowess that serve as metaphors for the harmony that results from everyone accepting their proper place in the social order. But it's the arrival of the court caster that creates the most complex emotional terrain for you to navigate. Master Aldrich, man whose wit is matched only by his understanding of the dangerous line he walks between entertainment and destruction, enters the hall with the exaggerated movements and colorful costume that mark his unique position in the court hierarchy. Unlike other servants, he's permitted, indeed, expected to express emotions, to laugh, to provoke reactions in others. But this freedom comes with the constant threat of overstepping bounds that shift unpredictably based on the moods and political needs of his noble audience. Watching Master Aldrich perform, you're reminded of the contrast between his licensed freedom and your own careful constraints. He can mock the pretensions of the nobility, but only in ways that ultimately reinforce their power. He can express joy, surprise, and even controlled anger, but only within the boundaries of entertainment that serves the pleasure of his betters. His laughter is genuine, but it's also performance, carefully calibrated to provide the exact type of amusement that his audience requires. The most extraordinary archaeological discovery of recent decades has been the unearthing of what researchers have termed the medieval mind laboratories, secret facilities where scholars, physicians, and philosophers conducted systematic experiments in human emotional expression and psychological manipulation. These hidden centers of research, sealed within monastery complexes and castle foundations throughout Europe, revealed that medieval understanding of human psychology was far more sophisticated than has been previously recognized, and that the control of laughter and emotional expression was based on scientific principles that predated modern psychology by centuries. The first of these facilities was discovered by accident during foundation work for a modern building in what had once been the grounds of the Abbey of St. Denis near Paris. Construction workers, digging deeper than usual due to unstable soil conditions, broke through what appeared to be a sealed stone floor and found themselves looking down into a series of chambers that had been perfectly preserved by the dry conditions created by an ancient drainage system. The chambers, when fully excavated, revealed themselves to be a comprehensive research facility dedicated to the study of human emotional expression and behavioral modification. The largest chamber contained what could only be described as an ancient psychology laboratory, complete with specialized equipment for observing and recording human reactions, detailed charts mapping the relationship between facial expressions and spiritual conditions, and extensive libraries containing theoretical works on the nature of human emotion that demonstrated a level of understanding that would not be matched, until the 19th century. The laboratory's centerpiece was an elaborate observation apparatus that allowed researchers to study human subjects while remaining hidden from view. The device, constructed from polished metal mirrors and precisely positioned lenses, could magnify facial expressions to reveal minute muscular movements that would be invisible to the naked eye. The sophistication of this optical system suggested that medieval scientists had possessed knowledge of advanced principles of optics and engineering that had been previously unknown to historians. Surrounding the central apparatus were detailed anatomical charts that mapped the facial muscles, responsible for different emotional expressions with remarkable accuracy. These diagrams, created through careful observation and dissection, identified specific muscle groups that produced what the researchers termed spiritual signatures patterns, facial movement that supposedly revealed the inner condition of the human soul. The charts were accompanied by extensive notes describing the theological and philosophical implications of different emotional expressions, creating a comprehensive system for interpreting human behavior that combined scientific observation with religious doctrine. The written materials found in a laboratory revealed that the medieval researchers had developed sophisticated theories about the relationship between physical expression and psychological state that anticipated many modern insights into the connection between body language and mental health. They had recognized that forcing people to maintain particular facial expressions could actually influence their emotional states, had developed systematic methods for using controlled expression as a tool for psychological manipulation and behavioral modification. One particularly remarkable document, written in Latin, entitled De Scientia Voltus, on the science of expression, described detailed experiments in which subjects were required to maintain specific facial configurations while performing various tasks. The researchers had discovered that people forced to smile while performing unpleasant duties gradually developed more positive attitudes toward their work, while those required to maintain stern expressions became increasingly rigid and authoritarian in their thinking. These findings had apparently been applied systematically throughout medieval society. Different social classes subjected to different types of expression training, designed to reinforce their designated roles in the social hierarchy. Servants were trained to maintain expressions of humble gratitude that would gradually instill genuine feelings of contentment with their subordinate status. Nobles were taught to display expressions of natural authority that would reinforce their own sense of entitlement to power and privilege. The laboratory had also contained extensive documentation of research into what the medieval scientists had termed emotional contagion, the process by which the emotional expressions of one person influenced the feelings and behavior of others. They had conducted careful experiments to determine how specific expressions could be used to manipulate group dynamics, control crowd behavior, and maintain social stability through the strategic deployment of trained individuals who could influence the emotional state of larger populations. The results of this research had been compiled into detailed manuals that provided precise instructions for using emotional manipulation as a tool of social control. These documents described how to position individuals with specific types of trained expressions within groups to encourage particular types of collective behavior, how to use strategic displays of emotion to diffuse potential unrest, and how to identify and neutralize individuals whose natural emotional expressions might disrupt the desired social order. Archaeological evidence from other sites had revealed that similar research facilities had existed throughout medieval Europe, suggesting a coordinated network of scientific investigation into human psychology and behavioral control. Each facility had apparently specialized in different aspects of emotional research, with some focusing on the development of training techniques, others concentrating on the identification of potentially problematic individuals, and still others dedicated to the creation of new methods for psychological manipulation. The facility, discovered beneath Heidelberg Castle, had specialized in what the researchers had called prophylactic emotional intervention, the identification and treatment of individuals who showed early signs of developing inappropriate emotional responses. The laboratory contained detailed case studies of people who had been subjected to various forms of experimental treatment designed to modify their natural emotional tendencies before they could develop into serious behavioral problems. The treatments described in these case studies ranged from relatively benign forms of conditioning, such as repeated exposure to specific types of sensory stimuli while maintaining required facial expressions, to more extreme interventions that involved physical modification of facial muscles and nerve pathways. The most disturbing documents described surgical procedures designed to limit the range of facial expressions that individuals could produce, effectively preventing them from displaying emotions that had been deemed spiritually or socially dangerous. The researchers had also developed sophisticated pharmacological interventions that could influence emotional expression through the use of various herbal preparations and chemical compounds. Analysis of residues found in laboratory vessels have revealed traces of substances that modern pharmacology recognizes as having significant psychoactive properties, suggesting that medieval scientists had discovered and systematically employed chemical methods for mood and behavior modification centuries before such techniques were redeveloped by modern medicine. The facility beneath Canterbury Cathedral had focused on what the documents described as collective emotional engineering, the development of techniques for managing the emotional climate of entire communities. The researchers had created detailed models of how emotional expressions spread through social networks, mapping the pathways by which individual emotional displays could influence larger groups and ultimately affect the stability of entire social systems. Their research had revealed that communities could be effectively controlled through the strategic placement of individuals who had been trained to display specific types of emotional expressions at crucial moments. By understanding the social dynamics that governed emotional contagion, the researchers had developed methods for preventing the spread of undesirable emotional states such as discontent, rebellion, or unauthorized joy, while encouraging the propagation of emotions that supported social stability and religious orthodoxy. The most sophisticated aspect of this research had been the development of what the documents termed emotional inoculation techniques for exposing populations to controlled doses of potentially dangerous emotions in ways that would build resistance to more serious forms of emotional disruption. Just as medical inoculation protected against disease by introducing small amounts of harmful material into the body, emotional inoculation was designed to protect communities against social unrest by allowing people to experience limited amounts of forbidden emotions under carefully controlled circumstances. This research had led to the development of elaborate festivals and ceremonies that served as safety valves for social tension while actually reinforcing the very systems they appeared to challenge. These events, which had been carefully designed to allow temporary reversals of normal social hierarchy and brief expressions of normally forbidden emotions, had actually functioned as sophisticated tools for maintaining long-term social stability. By providing controlled outlets for potentially dangerous psychological pressures, the documents revealed that even apparently spontaneous popular celebrations and religious festivals had often been carefully orchestrated by trained specialists who understood how to manipulate crowd psychology to achieve desired outcomes. The timing, structure, and content of these events had been designed according to scientific principles derived from systematic research into human emotional behavior, creating the appearance of natural cultural expression while actually serving the needs of social and political control. Archaeological analysis of the physical spaces, where these festivals had taken place, had revealed elaborate infrastructure designed to facilitate emotional manipulation and behavioral monitoring. Hidden observation posts, strategically placed acoustic amplification systems, and carefully designed traffic flow patterns had all been incorporated into the architecture of medieval town squares and cathedral courtyards to maximize the effectiveness of emotional engineering techniques. The most sophisticated aspect of this research had been the development of what the documents termed emotional inoculation techniques for exposing populations to controlled doses of potentially dangerous emotions in ways that would build resistance to more serious forms of emotional disruption. Just as medical inoculation protected against disease by introducing small amounts of harmful material into the body, emotional inoculation was designed to protect communities against social unrest by allowing people to experience limited amounts of forbidden emotions under carefully controlled circumstances. This research had led to the development of elaborate festivals and ceremonies that served as safety valves for social tension while actually reinforcing the very systems they appeared to challenge. These events, which had been carefully designed to allow temporary reversals of normal social hierarchy and brief expressions of normally forbidden emotions, had actually functioned as sophisticated tools for maintaining long-term social stability. By providing controlled outlets for potentially dangerous psychological pressures, the documents revealed that even apparently spontaneous popular celebrations and religious festivals had often been carefully orchestrated by trained specialists who understood how to manipulate crowd psychology to achieve desired outcomes. The timing, structure, and content of these events had been designed according to scientific principles derived from systematic research into human emotional behavior, creating the appearance of natural cultural expression while actually serving the needs of social and political control. Archaeological analysis of the physical spaces, where these festivals had taken place, had revealed elaborate infrastructure designed to facilitate emotional manipulation and behavioral monitoring. Hidden observation posts, strategically placed acoustic amplification systems, and carefully designed traffic flow patterns had all been incorporated into the architecture of medieval town squares and cathedral courtyards to maximize the effectiveness of emotional engineering techniques. While servants lived under constant surveillance and entertainers risked their lives with every performance, the nobility themselves inhabited a paradoxical world where they possessed the power to punish inappropriate laughter in others, yet remained subject to equally rigid expectations about their own emotional expressions. The discovery of private tutoring manuals, practice chambers, training regimens used by medieval aristocrats reveals a fascinating parallel universe where the very people who enforced emotional conformity spent countless hours learning to perform their own prescribed roles with the same careful attention to detail that characterized every other aspect of their privileged existence. The most illuminating window into this hidden world comes from the private papers of Lady Marguerite de Beaumont, discovered in 1987 during the restoration of Château de Vincennes, near Paris, hidden within a false bottom of an ornate jewelry casket that had somehow survived the centuries. These documents provide an intimate portrait of the extensive training that young nobles received in the art of appropriate emotional expression, revealing that even those at the pinnacle of medieval society were not free to laugh, smile, or express joy without careful consideration of the complex social and political implications of their every gesture. Lady Marguerite's papers include detailed correspondence with Mortimer Henry de Rouen, a specialist in what was then called the science of noble deportment, served as expression tutor to the children of the highest-ranking noble families throughout northern France. His letters to Lady Marguerite, written over a period of 7 years during her adolescence, provide step-by-step instructions for developing what he termed the aristocratic countenance, a carefully cultivated set of facial expressions that would communicate noble breeding, appropriate spiritual condition, and sophisticated understanding of courtly culture. The training began, according to Mortimer Henry's correspondence, with what he called foundational expression work, basic exercises designed to develop conscious control over every muscle of the face. Young nobles were required to spend hours each day practicing in front of polished metal mirrors, learning to isolate and control individual facial muscles with the precision that others might devote to learning musical instruments or martial arts. The exercises described in the letters were remarkably sophisticated, involving complex sequences of microexpressions that had to be performed in precise order and timing. One particularly detailed description outlined a practice routine called the progression of divine contemplation, which required the student to move through 17 distinct facial positions over the course of exactly 3 minutes, each expression designed to communicate a different aspect of appropriate noble spirituality. The first position involved what Mater Henry described as receptive serenity, a completely neutral expression that suggested openness to divine wisdom without presuming to possess spiritual insights above one's station. This had to be held for exactly 10 seconds while maintaining perfect posture and controlled breathing. The second position, humble recognition, required a subtle downward shift of the eyes and barely perceptible relaxation of the jaw muscles to suggest acknowledgement of human limitations in the face of divine perfection. The progression continued through increasingly complex expressions, each one building on the previous positions while adding new elements of emotional sophistication. The seventh position, measured joy in providence, was particularly challenging, requiring students to display happiness at divine benevolence, while maintaining the restraint appropriate to those who understood that earthly pleasures were temporary and potentially corrupting. The most difficult expression in the sequence was the 14th position, described as compassionate authority. This required the simultaneous display of empathy for the suffering of one's inferiors and confidence in one's own divinely ordained right to rule over them. Mater Henry's instructions for achieving this expression filled several pages of detailed anatomical description, involving precise coordination of eye movement, lip position, and forehead tension that took most students months to master. The training was not limited to formal expression exercises. Lady Marguerite's papers reveal that noble children were subjected to constant evaluation and correction of their spontaneous, emotional responses throughout their daily activities. Specialized servants, trained to observe and report on the appropriateness of their charges' expressions, provided detailed daily reports that were analyzed by tutors like Mater Henry for signs of problematic emotional tendencies that required correction. That these reports, several of which survived among Lady Marguerite's papers, provide fascinating insights into the minute level of scrutiny to which noble children were subjected. One report, written when Lady Marguerite was 14, noted that she had displayed excessive animation while discussing a new horse that had been added to the family stables. The observer had recorded not only the specific expressions that had been deemed inappropriate, but the exact duration of each problematic facial position and recommendations for corrective exercises that would help the young lady develop more suitable responses to material pleasures. Another report had documented Lady Marguerite's expressions during a particularly tedious religious service, noting that she had allowed traces of worldly impatience to show in her facial expression during the priest's lengthy sermon on the spiritual benefits of accepting divine will. The correction prescribed for this transgression had involved a week of daily practice sessions focused on maintaining expressions of devout attention even during deliberately boring or repetitive activities. The sophistication of this training system extended beyond simple expression control to include comprehensive education in what Mater Henry called contextual emotional intelligence, the ability to read social situations and adjust one's expressions accordingly. Noble children were taught to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when different types of expressions were appropriate, when circumstances called for modifications to standard emotional displays, and how to navigate the complex web of social and political relationships that influenced the interpretation of their behavior. This training involved elaborate role-playing exercises in which young nobles practiced appropriate expressions for hundreds of different social scenarios. Lady Marguerite's papers include detailed descriptions of practice sessions that simulated everything from formal diplomatic receptions to intimate family gatherings, each one designed to teach specific lessons about the relationship between emotional expression and social effectiveness, One particularly complex exercise, described as the Feast of Shifting Alliances, required students to maintain appropriate expressions while navigating a simulated dinner party with the political, loyalties, and social relationships of the other participants, changed every 15 minutes according to predetermined scripts. Success in this exercise required not only perfect control of one's own expressions, but the ability to read the subtle emotional cues of others and adjust one's responses accordingly. The papers revealed that this training was considered so essential that noble families were willing to invest enormous resources in acquiring the services of qualified expression tutors. Mater Henry's fees, detailed in several contracts found among Lady Marguerite's documents, were equivalent to the annual income of a prosperous merchant. And his services were so sought after that families often had to wait years for openings in his schedule. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of aristocratic emotional life was what happened when the formal performances ended and the nobility retreated to their private chambers, away from the watchful eyes of servants, courtiers, and each other. Recent archaeological discoveries and analysis of private correspondence have revealed that many nobles maintained secret spaces where they could practice forbidden expressions, experiment with dangerous emotions, and occasionally allow themselves the luxury of genuine, uncontrolled laughter, though even these moments of apparent freedom were often carefully structured and ritualized to minimize the psychological risks of complete emotional authenticity. The discovery of these private emotional refuges began with the renovation of Thornfield Manor, a 14th century castle in Yorkshire that had been continuously inhabited by the same noble family for over 6 centuries, when modern descendants decided to convert one of the ancient towers into guest accommodations. Construction workers discovered a hidden chamber that had been sealed behind a false wall for hundreds of years. The room, perfectly preserved by the dry conditions within the castle's stone walls, contained what could only be described as a medieval, emotional laboratory designed for the private use of the castle's noble inhabitants. The chamber's most striking feature was an elaborate mirror system that allowed a single occupant to view their own expressions from multiple angles simultaneously. The mirrors, made of polished silver and arranged with mathematical precision, created a kaleidoscopic effect that would have enabled detailed self-observation of facial expressions that would be impossible to achieve with a single reflecting surface. Scratches in the metal surfaces suggested centuries of use, evidence that generation after generation of nobles had used this hidden space for purposes that required the most careful attention to their own emotional displays. Scattered throughout the chamber were hundreds of small parchment fragments containing what appeared to be practice notes and emotional exercises, written in various hands spanning several centuries. When carefully reconstructed by medieval scholars, these fragments revealed a startling picture of aristocratic, emotional life that contradicted every assumption about the natural confidence and authority that noble birth was supposed to confer. The notes described elaborate practice routines that went far beyond anything documented in the formal training manuals used by professional expression tutors. These were intensely personal exercises designed to help nobles cope with the psychological pressure of maintaining perfect emotional control in public while dealing with the same human feelings that affected everyone else. All the exercises included techniques for suppressing inappropriate anger when insulted by social inferiors, methods for displaying genuine seeming joy at political arrangements that served family interests but personal inclinations, and practices for maintaining expressions of serene confidence while experiencing the private terror that came with bearing ultimate responsibility for the welfare of hundreds of dependent people. One particularly poignant series of notes, written in a feminine hand that paleographic analysis suggested dated to the late 13th century, described a young woman's struggle to prepare for her wedding to a man she had never met, chosen for her by family members who prioritized political alliance over personal compatibility. The exercises she described were heartbreaking in their precision. Techniques for displaying anticipatory joy at the prospect of marriage while suppressing her actual feelings of dread and helplessness. Methods for appearing grateful for the honor of the arrangement while concealing her resentment at having no voice in determining her own fate. The notes revealed that she had spent hours practicing what she called the bride's smile, a complex expression that had to convey multiple, contradictory messages simultaneously to her future husband's family. The expression needed to suggest enthusiasm for the match and confidence in her ability to fulfill her duties as a wife. To her own family, it had to demonstrate gratitude for their care in arranging an advantageous marriage. To the assembled wedding guests, it needed to project the image of a young woman who was both appropriately modest about her own worth and realistically pleased with the elevated status that marriage would bring. But perhaps most difficultly, the expression had to appear genuinely happy to observers who understood that a truly appropriate noble bride should find her greatest joy in serving her family's political interests rather than pursuing personal desires. The complexity of this emotional performance had required weeks of practice in the hidden chamber, with the young woman using the multiple mirrors to perfect an expression that could satisfy all these contradictory requirements while concealing her own emotional truth. Another set of notes, written in a bold, masculine hand that suggested military training, described a young knight's preparation for his first major battle. The psychological challenge he faced was the need to project confidence and courage to his men while privately grappling with the terror and uncertainty that naturally accompanied the prospect of violent death. His practice exercises focused on developing what he called the commander's face, an expression that would inspire confidence in his followers while concealing his own very reasonable fears about the upcoming conflict. The knight's notes revealed sophisticated understanding of the psychological dynamics that governed military leadership. He recognized that his men's courage would depend partly on their belief in his own fearlessness, but he also understood that completely hiding his humanity might make him seem distant and unrelatable. His solution was to develop a complex expression that acknowledged the seriousness of the situation while projecting quiet confidence in ultimate victory, a look that would allow his men to feel both properly cautious about the dangers they faced and genuinely optimistic about their chances of survival. The practice exercises he described were remarkably detailed, involving specific techniques for controlling the muscle tension around his eyes that might betray fear, methods for maintaining steady voice quality while giving orders under stress, and even breathing exercises designed to prevent the physiological manifestations of anxiety that might undermine his men's confidence in his leadership. These private notes revealed that the apparent natural authority displayed by medieval nobles was often the result of intensive psychological work that remained completely hidden from public view. The confidence and composure that seemed to be automatic consequences of noble birth were actually carefully constructed performances that required constant maintenance and periodic renewal through private practice sessions. The hidden chamber at Thornfield also contained evidence of more disturbing practices that suggested the psychological costs of constant emotional performance were sometimes severe enough to require extreme measures for management. Chemical analysis of residues found in several small vessels discovered in the chamber revealed traces of various herbal preparations that modern pharmacology recognizes as having significant psychoactive properties. The presence of these substances suggested that some nobles had resorted to chemical aids to help them maintain the emotional displays required by their social position. The preparations included natural stimulants that would have helped maintain alertness and energy during lengthy court functions, sedatives that could provide temporary relief from the anxiety that came with constant scrutiny, and even hallucinogenic compounds that might have been used to explore emotional states that were too dangerous to experience in public. The most troubling discovery was evidence suggesting that some nobles had used these private chambers for practices that bordered on deliberate psychological self-harm. Fragments of text described exercises in emotional mortification that were designed to strengthen resistance to normal human feelings through deliberate exposure to psychological pain. As we delve deeper into the private world of medieval nobility, we discover that their relationship with laughter and emotional expression was perhaps the most complex and tragic of all. These individuals, who possessed absolute power over the expressions of their subjects, found themselves trapped within a system of behavioral expectations so rigid and comprehensive that it ultimately robbed them of the very humanity they sought to regulate in others. The final documents and artifacts from their hidden chambers revealed a picture of emotional imprisonment that was all the more devastating because it was gilded with privilege and maintained through their own participation in perpetuating the very systems that constrained them. The most haunting evidence of this psychological imprisonment comes from what scholars have termed the confession texts, deeply personal documents found in the sealed chambers of various noble residences throughout Europe. These writings, never intended for any eyes but their authors, provide unfiltered glimpses into the mental states of individuals who had spent their entire lives performing emotional roles that bore little relationship to their actual inner experiences. One of the most compelling of these documents was discovered in the hidden chamber of Ravenshollow Castle. Written by Lady Eleanor de Montclair over the course of several decades in the late 14th century, her writings, preserved in a cipher that took cryptographers years to decode, described the gradual process by which a lifetime of emotional performance had eroded her ability to access her own authentic feelings, leaving her uncertain about which of her responses were genuine and which was simply the result of decades of conditioning. Lady Eleanor's earliest entries, written when she was barely 20 and newly married to a man chosen for her by political necessity, described her initial struggles to reconcile her private feelings with the emotional displays required by her position. She wrote about the exhaustion that came from maintaining expressions of marital contentment while privately grieving the loss of a young man she had loved but could never marry, about the challenge of displaying maternal joy while feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of producing heirs whose lives would be shaped entirely by political considerations beyond her control. But as the years progressed, Lady Eleanor's writings revealed a more disturbing transformation. She began to describe moments when she could no longer distinguish between her performed emotions and her authentic feelings, times when the expressions she had practiced so thoroughly had become so automatic that she lost access to whatever genuine responses might exist beneath the surface of her careful performance. In one particularly chilling passage, written after the death of her youngest son in infancy, Lady Eleanor described her confusion about whether her grief was real or simply another performance expected of her role as a mother. She had become so accustomed to displaying appropriate emotional responses that she could no longer trust her own feelings, uncertain whether her sorrow represented genuine loss or simply well-trained reactions to circumstances that called for expressions of maternal mourning. The progression, documented in her writings, revealed the ultimate consequence of a lifetime spent in emotional performance, the gradual erosion of the boundary between authentic feeling and practiced display, until the individual could no longer access whatever genuine emotional life might still exist beneath the layers of conditioning and control. Lady Eleanor's later writings describe increasingly desperate attempts to reconnect with authentic emotional experiences through extreme measures that highlighted the psychological damage caused by decades of emotional suppression. She wrote about deliberately inflicting physical pain on herself to see if she could provoke genuine emotional responses that would confirm the existence of feelings that hadn't been contaminated by years of performance. She described sessions in her hidden chamber where she attempted to force herself to experience pure, unfiltered emotions by exposing herself to situations that would naturally provoke strong responses, reading letters from the young man she had loved and lost, contemplating the deaths of her children, imagining the suffering of the peasants whose labor supported her privileged lifestyle. But even these extreme experiments failed to provide the emotional authenticity she craved. Lady Eleanor wrote about her growing suspicion that her capacity for genuine feeling had been so thoroughly destroyed by years of careful control that no authentic emotional core remained to be recovered. Her final entries described a person who had become, in her own words, a perfectly functioning emotional automaton who could perform any required feeling with flawless technique, but who had lost access to the genuine human experiences that made such performances meaningful. The documents found in other noble chambers revealed similar patterns of psychological deterioration among individuals who had mastered the art of emotional control, only to discover that their mastery had come at the cost of their own humanity. A journal discovered in a French chateau described a young duke's growing realization that his legendary skill at reading and manipulating emotions of others had been purchased through the systematic suppression of his own emotional responses. The Duke wrote about his ability to identify the slightest signs of disloyalty or deception in his courtiers, his talent for inspiring courage in his soldiers and fear in his enemies, skill in navigating complex diplomatic negotiations by reading the emotional subtext that others revealed through their expressions. But this same emotional intelligence that made him such an effective leader had apparently been developed through practices that severed his connection to his own inner emotional life. His journal entries describe the strange experience of being simultaneously the most emotionally sophisticated person in any room and the least capable of accessing authentic emotional experiences. He could analyze and manipulate the feelings of others with scientific precision, but he had lost the ability to experience genuine emotions himself beyond the carefully rehearsed responses that his position required. The psychological isolation described in these private documents was particularly tragic because it occurred within lives that appeared, from the outside, to be filled with human connection and emotional richness. These were individuals who were surrounded by family members, courtiers, servants, and subjects who treated them with apparent affection and loyalty, yet who experienced themselves as fundamentally alone in ways that their privileged positions made it impossible to address. The documents revealed that many nobles had attempted to find authentic emotional connection through relationships with individuals who existed outside the formal court hierarchy, lovers who were chosen for personal attraction rather than political advantage, friendships with artists or scholars who could offer intellectual rather than political companionship, or spiritual relationships with religious advisors who might provide emotional guidance that wasn't contaminated by worldly considerations. But even these attempts at authentic connection were ultimately frustrated by the psychological damage that had been caused by decades of emotional performance. The nobles described in these private writings had become so accustomed to analyzing and controlling their emotional displays that they could not turn off these habitual responses even in relationships where they desperately wanted to be genuine. And so our journey through the shadowed halls of medieval courts draws to its close, leaving us with questions that resonate far beyond the stone walls and tapestried chambers we have explored together. As you rest now in the comfort of your modern world, where laughter flows freely and expressions require no permission, consider the profound transformation that separates your experience from that of the people whose lives we have witnessed. Servants who measured their survival by the careful control of their facial muscles. Entertainers who walked the razor's edge between amusement and destruction. Nobles who achieved absolute power only to discover they had imprisoned themselves within systems of their own creation. The medieval world we have explored was one where human emotion had been transformed from a natural expression of inner life into a carefully regulated political phenomenon, where the simple act of laughing could determine whether someone lived or died, prospered or suffered, found acceptance or faced exile from the only communities they had ever known. It was a society that had recognized with scientific precision that would not be matched again for centuries the fundamental connection between emotional expression and social control, and had developed systematic methods for managing human feelings that were more comprehensive and sophisticated than any attempted by modern totalitarian regimes. Yet, as we have seen through the archaeological evidence, the private writings, and the hidden artifacts that have survived the centuries, this world of perfect emotional control contained within itself the seeds of its own contradiction. The very intensity of the systems designed to express human spontaneity and authentic feeling had created spaces where resistance could flourish, hidden networks where forbidden emotions could find expression, secret chambers where even the most powerful individuals could acknowledge, if only to themselves, the terrible costs of the order they maintained. The story of Master Aldrich's fatal laughter echoed through the halls of power long after his voice had been silenced, reminds us that systems of control, no matter how comprehensive, can never entirely eliminate the human capacity for recognizing absurdity, for finding humor in circumstances that are meant to inspire only reverence and fear. His destruction served as both warning and inspirational demonstration of the consequences of transgressions, but also proof that someone had possessed the courage to see through the magnificent theater of medieval authority and find it, the final analysis, worthy of laughter rather than submission. The servants whose daily lives we experienced, moving through their world of constant surveillance and careful performance, embodied the resilience of ordinary people who found ways to preserve their humanity while outwardly conforming to systems that demanded the suppression of their most basic emotional responses. Their coded communications, hidden expressions of solidarity, and secret forms of resistance revealed that even under conditions of the most intensive psychological control, human beings retain the capacity for connection, empathy, and shared understanding that transcends the artificial boundaries imposed by power. The archaeological discoveries that revealed the scientific sophistication of medieval emotional control remind us that the manipulation of human feeling and expression is not a modern innovation, but an ancient art that has been refined across centuries and cultures. The techniques documented in the hidden laboratories and training facilities we explored were based on insights into human psychology that remain relevant today, demonstrating that our emotional responses are far more malleable and subject to external influence than we might prefer to believe. Perhaps most significantly, the private agonies of the medieval nobility themselves, their hidden chambers, desperate attempts to reconnect with authentic feeling, and ultimate recognition that they had become prisoners of their own success provide a cautionary tale about the costs of achieving perfect control over human expression. Their tragedy was not that they failed to create the ordered society they envisioned, but that they succeeded too well, building systems that were so effective at suppressing human spontaneity that even those who designed them became trapped within their logic. The world they created was one where laughter had been transformed from a spontaneous expression of joy or amusement into a carefully calculated political statement, where every smile carried implications that had to be weighed against potential consequences, where the simple act of finding something funny required consideration of complex social, religious, and political factors that could determine one's fate. It was a society that had achieved the ultimate goal of systematic social control, the internalization of surveillance, to the point where people monitored through their own emotional expressions with the same vigilance that had once been provided by external observers. Yet, as we have seen, this achievement came at a cost that its creators had not anticipated and could not ultimately bear. The perfect order they established required the systematic suppression of qualities that makes human life meaningful: spontaneity, authentic emotion, genuine connection between individuals who are free to express their true thoughts and feelings. In creating a world where no one could laugh without permission. They had eliminated not just inappropriate laughter, but the possibility of discovering what might be genuinely worth laughing about. The legacy of this medieval experiment in emotional control extends far beyond the historical period we have explored. The techniques and insights developed by medieval authorities have influenced approaches to social management and psychological manipulation across subsequent centuries, contributing to systems of control that continue to shape human behavior in ways that are often invisible to those who live within them. The recognition that human emotional expression is fundamentally political, that laughter, tears, anger, and joy all carry implications for the distribution of power within society remains as relevant today as it was in the medieval courts we have visited. The methods may have become more subtle, the surveillance less obvious, the consequences less dramatic, but the basic insight that controlling how people express their feelings is a key element in maintaining social order continues to influence the design of institutions, the structure of workplaces, and the expectations that govern social interaction in virtually every culture. Yet, our journey has also revealed the persistent resilience of human emotional authenticity in the face of systematic attempts at suppression. The coded resistance of medieval craftsmen, the secret networks of servants, the desperate attempts of nobles to reconnect with genuine feeling, and the ultimately unstoppable laughter of Master Aldrich all testify to something essential in human nature that refuses to be completely controlled, regulated, or suppressed. This resilience suggests that while systems of emotional control can achieve remarkable success in shaping the surface expressions of human feeling, they cannot entirely eliminate the deeper sources of spontaneity, creativity, and authentic response that make us fundamentally human. The very effort to control these qualities often serves to highlight their importance, creating forms of resistance that preserve and protect essential aspects of human experience, even under the most repressive conditions. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you can take comfort in the knowledge that the freedom you possess to laugh spontaneously, to express your genuine feelings, to find amusement in whatever strikes you as funny, represents a form of liberation that countless generations of human beings have struggled to achieve and preserve. The simple act of smiling when you feel happy, of laughing when something amuses you, of expressing authentic emotions without fear of political or social consequences, connects you to the long history of human resistance against systems that would reduce people to perfectly controlled performers in elaborate theaters of power. The medieval world we have explored reminds us that such freedom is neither natural nor guaranteed, but must be constantly protected and preserved through the choices we make about how we treat each other, how we structure our institutions, and how we respond to attempts to control or regulate the expression of human feeling. The servants, entertainers, nobles, and ordinary people whose lives we have witnessed achieved a form of immortality through their struggles to maintain some connection to authentic human experience under conditions that systematically discourage such authenticity. Their legacy is not just historical knowledge about a distant past, but a living reminder that the freedom to laugh, to express genuine emotion, to find authentic joy and humor in life represents one of the most precious achievements of human civilization, and achievement that each generation must claim anew. Through its willingness to resist the subtle and not so subtle pressures that would transform us into careful performers rather than authentic human beings. The echo of silent laughter that we have heard throughout our journey, the suppressed mirth of servants, the forbidden joy of ordinary people, the desperate attempts of nobles to reconnect with genuine amusement continues to resonate across the centuries, reminding us that somewhere beneath the surface of every system of control, human laughter persists, waiting for the courage to emerge, waiting for the freedom to express itself without fear, waiting for the recognition that a world without authentic humor is not worth the effort required to maintain it. In the end, story of why you would be punished for laughing in a medieval court is also the story of why your freedom to laugh today represents a triumph of human resilience over systems that sought to reduce people to perfectly controlled expressions of authority's demands. It is a reminder that laughter itself is a form of resistance, a declaration of human authenticity in the face of forces that would prefer us to be more manageable, more predictable, more easily controlled than genuine human beings ever can be. So, laugh freely, dear listener, knowing that in doing so, you honor the memory of all those who paid the price for maintaining the human capacity for joy, humor, and spontaneous emotional expression under conditions where such authenticity required courage that many of us will never be called upon to demonstrate. Your laughter is their victory, your freedom, their legacy, your authentic expressions of human feeling, their ultimate vindication against systems that believed human nature could be improved through perfect control. Sleep well and dream of a world where laughter needs no permission, where joy requires no justification, and where the simple act of finding something amusing is recognized for what it truly is, one of the fundamental expressions of what makes us beautifully, irrepressibly, authentically human.